Margaret Carter, a 72-year-old widow, had spent most of her life building a home, raising her son, and quietly holding her family together. Over the years, however, that role had slowly faded. After her son married, the house no longer felt like hers. Conversations happened around her, not with her. Decisions were made without her input. And little by little, she became less a mother, and more of an inconvenience. One evening at dinner, everything crystallized. Her daughter-in-law looked at her and said, without hesitation, "You're just a burden in this house." Margaret didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply sat there, calm, as her son avoided her eyes and said nothing. But what neither of them knew was that earlier that same day, Margaret had quietly discovered something life-changing. She had won $500 million in the lottery. Instead of revealing it, she chose silence. The next morning, she continued her routine as if nothing had changed. She made her coffee alone, sat at the same table, and observed her surroundings with a new clarity. For the first time in years, she wasn't reacting to her family, she was watching them, listening more carefully, noticing things she had once ignored. She returned to the store to confirm the win, where the cashier's reaction made it undeniable. It was real, but instead of excitement, Margaret felt something deeper: control. For the first time in a long time, she had something that belonged entirely to her, something no one else knew about, could influence, or take away. That same day, she visited a lawyer. Without telling her family, she began setting up a private trust. She ensured that the money would be protected, legally untouchable, and entirely under her control. No shared accounts, no access, no assumptions. She didn't want revenge, she wanted independence. Meanwhile, her family began to reveal their own plans. Margaret overheard conversations late at night. Her daughter-in-law, frustrated and calculating, suggested moving Margaret into assisted living, not as a discussion, but as a decision already in motion. Brochures appeared on the kitchen counter. Her son approached her with carefully rehearsed words about comfort and support, but avoided eye contact as he spoke. Margaret didn't resist. She didn't confront them or argue. She simply said, "I'll think about it." But internally, everything had shifted. She no longer saw herself as someone being pushed out. She saw herself as someone preparing to leave on her own terms. Days later, the situation escalated. Her daughter-in-law presented official-looking documents at the table, papers that would give them control over Margaret's finances and decisions. They framed it as protection, as care, as necessity. Her son supported the idea, insisting it was for everyone's benefit. Margaret listened quietly. Then, instead of signing anything, she reached into her purse and placed her own documents on the table. Legal papers. Structured. Final. She calmly explained that everything she owned had already been transferred into a private trust, one that no one could access or control except her. There would be no accounts for them to manage, no decisions for them to make, no authority left for them to claim. The room fell silent. For the first time, her son and daughter-in-law were not in control. They didn't understand how things had changed so quickly, or how long she had been thinking ahead without them noticing. Her son asked why she hadn't told them. Margaret simply replied, because there was nothing to discuss. There was no anger in her voice, no bitterness, just clarity. When they insisted they had been taking care of her, Margaret responded quietly, "That's exactly why." Because what they called care had come with control, with judgment, with the slow erasure of her independence. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Margaret was no longer asking for space. She was claiming it. The following morning, she packed her belongings, not everything, just what mattered. She didn't rush, didn't hide what she was doing. She simply prepared, piece by piece, to leave behind a life that no longer respected her. Before leaving, she made one final cup of coffee. One cup. She stood by the window instead of sitting at the table, taking in the house one last time, not with regret, but with understanding. It had once been her home. Now it was just a place she was ready to move on from. When she walked downstairs, her son and daughter-in-law were waiting, quiet, uncertain, no longer in control of the situation. She didn't argue, didn't accuse, didn't explain. "I'll be staying somewhere else for a while," she said calmly. When asked where, she simply answered, "Somewhere that feels like mine." And with that, she walked out. No turning back. No dramatic goodbye. Just a quiet, final decision. As she stepped outside, the air felt different, not because the world had changed, but because she had, for the first time in years. She wasn't leaving out of pressure or obligation. She was leaving by choice. Margaret had spent a lifetime giving everything to her family, her time, her energy, her love, her sacrifices. Now, she was finally giving something to herself. Freedom. And in that quiet act of walking away, she didn't lose anything. She reclaimed everything.